Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. It's just wonderful to be with you all. I want to thank Martha, the Institute for Safe Families. I'm so impressed with this institute. I'm just learning about you for the very first time, and I'm sure it's not the last. And for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I think we owe both of them a great deal of gratitude for this great 2 days, don't we? Now, yesterday, Sunny, where's Sunny? So, okay, she's back there from Iowa. I don't know about you, but yesterday when she talked about ACE vibration, all night long the Beach Boys have been playing in my head, okay? It's got to stop. It's got to stop, right? And being with all of you just really does my heart good. This is very hard work, and it's so important that those of us that are passionate about driving this movement have these opportunities to come together, to learn from one another, to challenge one another, to rekindle our batteries and our commitment and our passion for this wonderful work. I think Martha said it well yesterday when she talked about all of us are passionate to drive this movement, and all of us need to see our work, and I know that you do from those of you that I've had the opportunity to talk to, that you understand that your work is profoundly important. So I've been asked to share with you through the context of my experience across sectors. I've had the opportunity to serve state government, both as a child welfare director in Wisconsin and as secretary of the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. And I see my dear friend Laura Porter, who I adore, out there. I learned so much from her when I was out there in Washington State as secretary, but also in my work now with America's nonprofit human serving organizations across this country. I was honored to be joined by John Janetta and Leslie Newman, John from Nebraska, Leslie from Delaware, as members of our national network to join me here, and thanks so much for coming and being a part of this. I hope to also weave in what are some of the promising approaches that we've heard these last couple of days, so I've been busy taking notes and revising my notes as I've gone along. But I also think it's important that we all step back, because we're going to be talking about how we need to get where we're going, but we also can never stop looking back and realizing how far we've come. When I was administrator of the Wisconsin Division of Children and Family Services back in 1996, and Jennifer Jones back there, the Wisconsin Children's Trust Fund, doing phenomenal work there. She was my executive assistant way back then, and I remember Bruce Perry, and I remember seeing his brain research. He came to Milwaukee and presented, and from there we created the first ever Better Badger Baby bus tour. Say that 10 times really fast. But sitting here yesterday, I thought, wow, how far we've come. To have the science, the ACE science now that just propels this work forward really does my heart good. But folks, yes, we have a lot to celebrate, but we have to be chronically dissatisfied. We have to be proud. We have to be hopeful. Please don't get me wrong. But we as people who are profoundly committed to this cause, to this movement, we have to be chronically dissatisfied until we know that this ACE science is truly hardwired, and I'm going to say that word a lot today, is truly hardwired into all systems that interface with children and their families, and we can't stop until that day happens. Now, for many of us, we're realizing we may not realize our dreams in our lifetimes, but we are but stewards of a time of whatever position we hold, and our job is to move it as far as we can for those who are going to follow us, and I know we're going to do that. So my motto is to infuse, align, and accelerate, and to make sure that we truly are changing the very systems that are interfacing with children and families. My story is one, again, across multiple sectors. And I remember when Governor Gregoire and I were talking in her office when she was looking at me and I was looking at her about, do we want to work together? And I said to her, I said, Governor, you got to understand something, because I was going to blow up my life to move out to Washington State. I thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever heard of, that I was going to go from Wisconsin to Washington and leave my husband back in Wisconsin to be a judge where he does great work, and I thought, this is crazy. And I said to her, Governor, you have to understand something. I've been doing this work a really long time, and I'm tired. I'm tired of trying to make programs and services within larger failed systems work. So if you want to hire a secretary that's going to make sure the buses run on time, I'm going to make sure we're getting those program outcomes, find somebody else. Been there, done that. I said, what this has got to be about for me, with your leadership, is about systems change, about truly changing the systems through which our children and families and communities oftentimes intersect. So I've developed this 21st century theory of change. It is my own, but it's what Laura will probably recognize and say, yep, this is what Susan came out to Washington State, and this is what we're working on, and I know that great work continues to this day. But if we want to enjoy prosperity, we must foster the health and well-being of all people. I've heard it here today so many times, health broadly defined, that neurobiopsychosocial, only 10% of a person's health is predicated by their primary care. Let's be real. America cannot bend the cost curve of health care. When 5% of the population is driving 50% of the expenditures in Medicaid, it's being proven in Medicare, and now they're talking about it across the other insurance plans across this country that are working with the general population. When 5% of the population drives 50% of the expenditures, and using predictive analytics in Washington State, when we drove deep into that 5%, we found the perfect storm of the biopsychosocial variables. America will not bend the cost curve of health care until it recognizes and understands this profound and important truth. And what we are perplexed by in this country is our definition of well-being. What does that mean? And yesterday and today, I heard some things that are starting to make me think, I think we're starting to get there. This happiness and hope index. But we seem to be stumped as a country on what is well-being. And I hope through the work that we all leave here today to do, we get clearer and with a much more definitive way in which we can talk about the well-being of people. As leaders, we must articulate a clear and compelling vision, create a culture for innovation and partnership, and practice adaptive leadership skills. I'm a groupie of Ron Heifetz from Harvard. I just think his work on adaptive leadership is phenomenal, and it has guided my leadership path for many, many years. And today, Sandy Bloom talked about that edge of chaos. Well, what Ron Heifetz talks about is that our first inclination, when things become complex and challenging, our first inclination as systems, and I've had the responsibility of running a lot of these systems, and our first inclination is find the first technical fix we can and shut that ambiguity down. But yet what Ron Heifetz will tell you and what Sandy was telling us today, it's in that place of ambiguity where our creativity will be found. And we have got to be willing as leaders to take the risks of leadership, to practice adaptive leadership skills. We are up against a very complex issue here, and simple solutions will simply not cut it. But here's the other thing. Everything cannot be about what new program, what new service. We are not going to program ourselves out of this issue. And in adaptive leadership, we understand we've got to be clear on what we keep. We've got to be clear on what we shed. We have to be clear on what we rearrange, and then clear on what it is that needs to be new. But this is far more than just about new programs and services that are needed. My next part of this theory of change is that we must move from program thinking to systems change thinking as the only way to achieve the ultimate outcomes we strive for. Now, here's the thing. When I think about the greatest social inequities in this country today, as I've had responsibility from everything from Medicaid to child welfare, juvenile justice, aging, long-term care, developmental disabilities, economic assistance, welfare to work, I think to myself, if we cannot see our work, and if others don't see our work, our leadership, and our advocacy as relevant to solving society's toughest problems, reducing the number of people living in our country should be ashamed of itself with what is the growing number of children in this country. When you see counties that have child poverty rates of over 40%, this is America. We've got to know, and others have to see us, and we've got to be seen as being relevant to increasing the number of people living healthy and safe lives. And knowing that we are relevant to, we see ourselves and others see us, as relevant to putting more people onto pathways for educational and employment success. We simply can't, as I said before, program our way out of this thing. This will require us to move from a linear and transactional mindset, which is every system's inclination, okay? Every system's inclination. To move from a linear and transactional mindset to a dynamic and transformational view across systems and sectors. Social theorists call it causes of causes, risks of risks. Sandy had that wonderful animated slide that showed the dominoes, right? fallen right over. This is what Dr. Garner was telling us yesterday about the vertical pilings and our need to infuse, align, and accelerate our work horizontally across the intersecting systems. This is hard work. And we must share accountability for the alignment of mutual policy, goals, and values across systems and sectors for collective impact that none of us alone can achieve. I believe history is going to look back on this Great Recession, because I'll tell you, this Great Recession has rocked a lot of houses, whether it's at the kitchen table, or it's in state houses, or at the federal level. I had to oversee the reduction of expenditures in Washington State in just over 2 years between Medicaid and social services of over $4 billion in just 2 years. History is going to look back on this time. And one of the ways I think we're going to get judged, and I hope we are lauded, is that we learned the art and the science of shared governance, shared responsibility, shared power with each other and with those we serve. One of the things I ask you to think about as you leave here today is, will you join me? And can we think about no longer calling people clients? Can we think about calling them neighbors? Because indeed that's what they are. Whether they live right next door to us, or down the street, or 2 communities over. I think when we think about those that we serve and we advocate for as our neighbors, we have a very different way in which we think about them, respect them, and see them as vital, vital participants in creating the kinds of communities that we want to see for all children and families. That's my theory of change. So for the last 4 years, I've been involved at the Harvard Center, not for the Developing Child, but for the Networked World, Harvard Center for a Networked World, and with APHSA, the American Public Human Services Association, that represents all counties and states in our country in human services, as well as with the Center. And we have developed over this period of time what we call the Human Services Value Curve. Now, you have to understand where I'm coming from today. I know a lot of folks here are coming out of the medical world, not my world, sorry. I have a lot I'm going to learn from you, but what I'm coming at this is from the human services world, because I think that's also a very important part of these systems that we've got to make sure is aligned to this science. So the values curve is basically about strategies and leadership approaches for real progress in transforming human services and human-serving organizations. We look at our values curve, and we're getting together this year in October for our 4th summit. And this, again, is made up of people. We even have people coming from England and Australia last year, and so this has been a very exciting and exhilarating thing to be a part of. And you see those outcome frontiers that we're moving toward. Well, let me walk you through this just a little bit, because I think all of you will think about the systems that the children and families that you intersect with are involved in, and how many of them are not far enough along in this human services value curve. So I'm going to use a transportation analogy about buses. If you're in the regulative business model, your buses are running on time, okay? People are getting signed up for TANF cash assistance if that's what they need. Children, if they're getting called in from CPS, calls are being answered, responses are being made. The buses are running on time. As you move up and you go to the collaborative business model, they're on time, the buses are still on time, but they're coordinated, and we've driven efficiency into our systems, greater efficiency. So now somebody can sign up and make sure if they're going to get food stamps, the SNAP program, we're also signing them up for other things that they may be eligible for. That's the collaborative business model, and many states and county human service agencies, when asked, will tell you that's where they're at, when they're really honest with themselves and others. The next is the integrative business model. The buses are on time, they're coordinated, but they're also achieving program outcomes. Program outcomes as defined by that program. So it might be the number of adoptions that are happening in the child welfare system, the number of placements that children should not have more than. Program outcomes are being achieved. Good, not great, but good. So now you move forward to the generative business model, the thing that all agencies that are part of the Harvard work are now trying to move toward. And this is where the ACE science, in fact, one of the things, I'm on the executive committee that's planning for this year's summit. One of the notes I wrote down is I've got to get this onto that summit agenda this fall, is generative, and now it's about impact. Now it is about very different leadership approaches that are needed and very different ways in which leaders are working within their organizations and outside of their organizations, and ways in which leaders understand they've got to generate resources. And we keep thinking, whenever we hear resources, we think, oh, that's money. Oh, no. How they generate resources, more broadly defined, to move to that greater impact: poverty, health and safety, education, employment. Now think, when you've got a human services delivery system thinking that way, think about what powerful partners they will be for us as champions of this ACE movement. So how do we move ACEs to scale? And today I'm going to talk about infusing, aligning, and accelerating. And I'm going to talk about those in 4 areas: our leadership, our organizations, whatever those are, but again, my perspective is coming from a human services background. And through policy, both big P and little p, we're all policy makers, everybody in this room. Policy is not just kept to the halls of Congress and to state houses. Everybody sets policy within their organizations, within the way in which they choose to deliver their practices every single day, and we are all advocates. So let's start with leadership, and leadership truly matters. Having a values-driven vision that provides you and others with that head and heart connection. I think Jane just reminded us of this, and that is that we must have and share our stories. Jane Lowe, yesterday, when she opened us up with her story of Ronaldo, I don't think there was probably a dry eye in this room. But we have to remember, it's the science, absolutely, but it's the people side of this work that will absolutely help us to create that head and heart connection for policymakers, practitioners, and others. Second, listening musically, thinking analytically. For me, the last 2 days, that has been listening to the medical world, a world that is not in my human services world, because I will tell you, healthcare reform is one of the most disruptive forces in the human services world that we're going to see in this decade, and I believe into the next. And to listen to systems and sectors and disciplines outside of your comfort zone right now is very, very important, because I believe when we do that, that is where the breakthroughs come from. So another, for instance, of that, yesterday, the discussion about the biology of hope and happiness really has me a bit perplexed. I'm going to have to study a lot more about that. We're all going to have to think more about that. But listening musically, things that are not typically always in front of us, in our journals, in the things that are on our desks, in the conversations that are in our typical meetings, we've got to listen musically and think analytically. Be disruptive by nature, remembering it is through that ambiguity that I talked about before, the edge of chaos that Sandra Bloom talked about, that new thinking and creativity are found. This is not easy, because as I said before, organizational cultures, the big bloated elephant, they are wired for transactional thinking, and as soon as things become ambiguous and people start feeling incompetent, when things become ambiguous or unclear, the first inclination is to try to shut that down with the first technical fix that we can find. And I think that's why in our country we see so much failed policy, because something bad happens, and instead of really getting under it, the risk of risks, the causes of causes, we create some new outside-in thing that's going to fix that system. And that's what I think creates a lot of the problems that we have. Fourth, collaborate widely, partner deeply, and share governance, as I talked about before. When I was out in Washington State, running the state's largest agency, I thought Betty Hyde, who became a very dear friend of mine, who runs the Department of Early Learning, because I didn't have early learning. I wasn't involved in early childhood in any area of my agency from a program perspective. But I called her up and I went and had dinner with her. She didn't know me from Adam, and she's like, what is the largest state secretary wanting to meet with the smallest state agency about? And I looked at her and said, Betty, what can I do to help you achieve your mission? Because when we get home visiting to scale through you, when we make sure that all children are in safe and appropriate and well-provided childcare. You are going to bend my cost curve, and I am going to achieve better outcomes on my end as the social service agency. This is something that's going to require a very different leadership style for all of us. It requires us to question, it questions our identity, it questions our sense of turf and protection. It's that big bloated elephant that Dr. Heifetz talked to us about yesterday. But I also think that it is in that place when we think about collaborating widely and partnering deeply, we're going to create resources. We're going to generate the kinds of resources we need to get this job done. There is a approach called the Pareto Frontier. I don't know how many of you have known it, but the Pareto Frontier is all about value creation. And basically on its axis, it shows that when partners come together, they start off, and typically in our public-private partnerships, and I'm going to talk about this from a public sector perspective, in our public-private partnerships, maybe we're working with the community sector and the public sector and trying to improve education outcomes, as an example. And we tend to stay down in simply staying put with looking at how we disperse finite resources, right, to try to achieve these larger goals. What the Pareto Frontier talks about is when you move that out across that axis, when you move it out, you actually start generating value if people share a clear and common goal, are hardwired together in a set of principles and values. And I'm going to give you an example I have of this, of our redesign of our Welfare to Work program in Washington State that is a perfect example of this Pareto Frontier, where as we were clear on what we were trying to achieve and what we were going to do individually and collectively together to move a system forward, the Pareto Frontier actually helps you see how you generate resources in that process. To educate and engage, then repeat, 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 repeat. Still, too many people don't know about the ACE science. Still, too many people don't understand it, and too many people view the science through a very narrow lens. Our job has got to be, as Governor Gregoire always reminded us, plain talk what you're talking about, because people don't know what the hell you're talking about. Plain talk it so people can understand that this is a simple framework to reduce intergenerational transmission and solve society's toughest problems. And I think the more we realize it, as much as it just exhausts us, it's like, do I have to repeat this one more time? Anybody and everybody has got to be educated on this science. We've got to put ourselves there, and I think so many of our panel members shared that with us yesterday and today, about, again, educate and repeat, repeat, repeat. Organizational hardwiring. All of us run organizations or are part of organizations. And again, this is where I go back to the program thinking, to the social change thinking, to the systems change thinking. It's got to get hardwired into our organizations. First of all, data sharing and data analytics. Now, for the human services world, not so much for the medical world. Medical world is far ahead of us in human services. This is our next frontier. Data analytics, predictive analytics is the absolute direction that we have got to go. But we are not going to get there until we tackle this tough issue of data sharing. There are many examples around this country. We did it out in Washington State. And basically my message to my lawyers was, don't tell me why I can't, tell me how I can. But there are many examples in this country where people have tackled this data sharing issue and dealt with HIPAA, figured out how to honor people's confidentiality. But until we understand the 11% of the people in Washington State that we serve drove 42% of our expenditures, and their integration across the myriad of our programs and services was just unbelievable. We have got to, in the human service area, and this is where all of you who aren't in human services need to be advocating for, this growing capability that we need for data sharing and data analytics. Measurement. Will you join me? And next year, when we put up this beautiful map, it won't just tell us all that who we are. It's going to start populating all that we've achieved. And can we agree that on this measurement front, until every state, at a state and county level, is measuring ACEs, right? How do we possibly move this forward at the kind of national scale that we're talking about? I also think that one of the areas that needs to happen in measurement here is influence. We're very focused on measuring outcomes. Don't get me wrong, very important. But I think as you really get into this work, you realize that we are influencers as well. And it may not be a direct path to the outcome, but it may have a significant influence on getting there. Executive functioning is a perfect example. Does it fit executive functioning and whether or not I can say that I've reduced the number of children in the out-of-home care system or that I've reduced the number of people on our TANF cash assistance programs? No. But does it have a great influence strategy? Absolutely that it does. And so I think for those of us that are the researchers in the room, I do think we have to be talking about that influence strategy. And the other one I heard yesterday that I hope we all agree to is that we've got to get true on how we measure ACE severity and ACE duration to further help us along in this work. Alignment. This is where I want to talk a little bit here about in our organizations. And I think we all have many examples in our organizations where in one part of our organization a program is running really well, but the overall organization is not aligned to the principles and to the values upon which the organization rests itself. We must measure this in our organizations, but here's the thing. I believe we measure this through measuring the engagement, the authentic engagement of those that we serve and represent, not just measuring their satisfaction, but measuring the authenticity of their engagement in every facet of our organization. But aligning our principles and values at an organizational level is key to this work. Continuous learning and critical thinking. I think those of us as leaders have got to know that in our organizations, that our organizations understand that failure is not failure if it's on the pathway to success. And we must be in beta testing all the time. I get a little bit tired as a human service person hearing people talk about evidence-based practices, very important, as if they are the destination, as if they are not simply the starting point. So I'm going to give you an example in a minute about an organization that I think is really doing some great work to bring this to scale. But before I do, let me just mention a couple more of these. Leveraging and building capacities that are necessary. Have anybody seen the Dan Paletta TED Talk? Has anyone seen that? It's a must-watch TED Talk, Dan Paletta. And one of the things that he does, and it's focused on the nonprofit human serving sector, but it could be talking about government, it could be talking about your hospital systems or any other system that you're involved with. For some reason in this helping field, we have allowed others to tell us that if our overhead is low, if our administrative costs are low, that somehow that's our badge of honor, right? And we've really achieved something great. Well, Dan Paletta basically says, what Fortune 500 company would ever want their epitaph to be, we kept our overhead low? But yet, for some reason, in this helping field that we are in, we don't understand that the capacities that we need, technology, evaluation, measurement, continuous quality improvement, the capacity to engage communities and generate resources takes organizational capacity. As a country, we have got to have this conversation. I'm watching America's nonprofit human serving organizations being told to have a 5% admin overhead rate. What? And yet, they are supposed to solve some of society's toughest problems. We are not going to get the breakthrough outcomes that we're all seeking if we continue to have what Dan Paletta calls a bake sale mentality. Creating a broader understanding of resource generation. I truly believe in all my years of this work, this is one of the fundamental levers of leadership, of this adaptive leadership that I was talking about, because it's not just money. It's leveraging and creating resources around expertise, influence, sharing, infrastructure. the more we come together as an ACE community and figure out not that what the medical world needs to do and what the human services world needs to do and what the criminal justice world needs to do. We've got to come together because it's in that space. We really are going to generate resources. And there are so many examples in our country how that has happened. Now, one example that's been recently out is the Harvard Brain Activity Map. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The whole purpose of this program now is to crack the problem of how the brain functions. But when you read the leading researchers talking about how they're going about this differently, they truly are getting at what I'm talking about in terms of resource generation. And here is their words, not mine. We will pool resources, share data, and accelerate the development of tools in brain research. That's where the power, I believe, resides, is when we figure out how together to leverage and generate resources beyond dollars. So here's that example. Now, I know this slide's going to like freak you out, so don't worry, you don't have to read it. But I was out in Montana several weeks back, and in Helena. In fact, where's Rob? There he is over there. Now, believe me, when I saw this, it wasn't because Rob Anda sits on the board of this organization that I'm going to talk about as to why I brought this. It is not. I'm walking through this organization. Intermountain is the agency. Long-standing child welfare, residential, behavioral health organization for kids. They simply have caught the ACE's fire out there, and Rob certainly, I'm sure, has helped with that. But here, this $9 million organization, that's not that big. This $9 million organization and their board is so passionate about this, they've created what's called the ChildWise Institute. Now, so I'm walking through this organization, and I see on the whiteboard of the director of the ChildWise Institute, I see this on his whiteboard. You see I took this picture. You see this? So this is their theory of change of how they are going to, and these are the outcomes they're looking at, mitigate toxic stress in children and magnify healthy relationships. And this talks about how in a 24-month plan, the ChildWise Institute, generating resources, as I said, through the power of leverage across systems and disciplines, is going to take the ACE study as its foundation, move it across awareness, accelerating knowledge, advocating for change. Again, that advocacy responsibility. Too many of America's nonprofits have gotten so focused on being providers of programs and services, they've forgotten that we are advocates first and service providers second as a sector. And we can never lose sight of that fundamental responsibility. They're going to do this work to elevate the consciousness of the importance of well-being, and the outcomes that they now are figuring out how they're going to measure will be measured by decreases in toxic stress and increases in healthy relationships. Rob serves on the board of ChildWise. Watch them. They are going to create, I believe, some true breakthrough outcomes for us as a movement. Congratulations, Rob. Practice. Every person, every time. And until we can say that the kind of practice we believe is necessary is happening for every person, every time, we cannot rest as a movement. Practitioners need a broader context for understanding the importance and impact of their work beyond programmatic outcomes. Child welfare is a perfect example of this. We have gotten so focused as a child welfare field on safety and permanency as ultimate outcomes that we have allowed ourselves to create a system that creates for children the constant sense that life is temporary, placements are temporary, family is temporary, right? The safety and permanency that we try to achieve as outcomes in our system need to permeate every day, every experience that a child has in this country's child welfare system. Remember, a child being in the child welfare system is likely to be their most memorable life experience. Think of that. And yet, one of the things I'm so proud of is Brian Samuels, at the Commissioner of the Children's Bureau. I told him when I was on a panel with him several months back, I said, Brian, when you got this country to stop being so focused on safety and permanency and to truly get focused on the well-being of children, it was in my 26 years of experience in child welfare, it was the first clearly articulated policy for child welfare that I had ever heard. So how we think about this in terms of improving the well-being of kids and how we align it and help our staff who get so focused on the number of placements, the length of stay in care, whether or not the child's parental rights are terminated and adoption happens, we've lost sight of the larger reasons why they're in this work. And I still think at the end of the day, when we come back and we try to think about what is this thing called well-being and child welfare, I keep coming back to belonging, mastery, generosity, and independence. And I think if we think about that in the context of how we go about our day-to-day work, we will have a much greater system and have much more profound impact on the lives of children who are at very high risk. Budget, the holy grail. The funding alignment is our holy grail. And we've got a public financing system today that makes no sense for everything I heard here yesterday and today. Now, who's going to be the first state? Jen, maybe it'll be you back there, or Sunny in Iowa, who's going to have a little contest here, to have their legislatures require an ACE statement. We have fiscal statements, right? Fiscal impact statements. How about an ACE impact statement on policies and budgets that are going to influence children and their families? Now, we always think to ourselves, well, that is just so hard, Susan, to try to figure out how to take these deep-end systems and realign this funding into the front end. But I want to give you an example, because, see, I don't think the road in front of us is all that unknown to us. Those of you that are in the human services world, go back to 25-plus years ago when this country got focused on rebalancing the long-term care system, right? Moving people from nursing home into home and community. You study that, and we will find in that study part of our roadmap into the future in terms of how it changed funding at a local and state and federal level. Ideas like money follows person, a deep commitment to home and community-based principles in terms of systems of care. I don't think this is all that unknown to us if we can go back and study where this has happened in social policy before and how do we replicate it in this. So my experience with this, one of the things I want to share with you about contracts and budget alignment being key, is really a frustrating experience I had in Washington State. And I had the head of Children's Hospital of Seattle come to see me, and he said, Secretary Dreyfus, we want to talk to you about Triple P, Positive Parenting Program, and we would like to train all pediatricians in the state on the first 2 phases of Triple P so that it can be done in the pediatrician's office by nurse practitioners and others. And we believe that if we do that, we will absolutely keep children from falling into the deeper end of our behavioral health system. And I was in the middle of class action litigation on the state's failed children's mental health system. This made a lot of sense to me. But this is where I want you to understand why it is so hard to get this funding alignment in place and how complex this becomes. Now, in Washington State, like in many states, we give 12 sessions of behavioral health treatment for children. 12 of what? Who knows? But you get 12 sessions of something. Hopefully it works. So they said, we want you to allow us to bill, just as pediatricians can bill for dental sealants in the pediatrician's office, we want to be able to bill in the pediatric office for the first 2 phases of Triple P in the pediatrician's office. But we're going to have to be able to bill against 2 of those 12 sessions. Still made sense to me. So I sent it out to the actuaries. Now, I don't know who these people are, but they're like in some cloud somewhere, and they stay hidden from you, that's for sure. So this goes out to the actuaries, and they came back and they said, really a good idea, but you can't do it. You can't do it because you're going to drive up utilization if you do this. And when driving up utilization, because we were underutilizing on the 12-session benefit, it was going to increase costs. And when you understand how public sector budgets work, within the short time frames within which they work, there was simply no way, in the way in which public funding is currently happening, that I could make a long-term investment like that, right, to generate what was going to be a significant influence on on the cost in our children's mental health delivery system. I think it's just a really good example of how this holy grail of funding alignment is hard, but folks, we are not going to get there until we figure that out. I'm going to have a few more examples of that. The other one here is understanding that community capacity needs to be built and is foundational to this work. I think Washington State, Laura Porter talked about this yesterday, but can we all agree? Can we all agree? Community as defined by those who live there. Not community as defined by bureaucrats, not community as defined by zip code, but community as defined by the people that live there. And our understanding that this community capacity, I believe that Washington State has shown that it works, but we don't exactly know what it is. We need more rigorous research on this thing called community capacity, and it not only needs to be studied and understood, but then to our public sector and our philanthropic partners, it has to be funded and sustained if we're going to make the changes that we truly want to see at a systems level. Practice must be aligned to the science and person, family-centered, and strengths-based engagement values. This has been one of my aha moments in my career. I don't care if you call it systems of care, recovery model, wraparound, if you call it what people call person, family-centered, strengths-based, whatever, whatever, whatever. These values of authentic voice and engagement are absolutely key. I thought it was amazing, the February Health Affairs Journal. I'm an avid reader of Health Affairs. Again, listening musically, thinking analytically. I'm not in the medical world, but I read that journal every time it comes out. February edition of Health Affairs. The entire journal was on engagement. And in the opening introductory article, it called engagement the blockbuster drug of the 21st century. We are, at the Alliance for Children and Families, we are embarking on creating a center, a national center, on engagement and neighborhood building. That change, if change is to be durable, the fuel must be internal and organic. And whether that change is for the individual, the family, or the neighborhood, it comes from the inside out. That transformational orientation of values, I think, is key to our ACE work, and it's key to every system and discipline that intersects across the lives of the children and families that we are talking about. And I believe that when those values are truly practiced, and this was my aha moment at the Harvard Center for the Developing Child a number of years back, I believe that when these values are practiced across these human service delivery systems, which again is the perspective I'm coming from, please understand that. I believe that that is where we start developing those executive functioning skills: focus, ability to make plans, set goals, solve problems, monitor actions, control impulses. When people are given true and authentic voice, the opportunity to experience success as they define it, I think Health Affairs was right. Engagement is the blockbuster drug of the 21st century. We are all policymakers and advocates each and every day. And it is both the big P and the little p. Because I've had state government experience and then community-based experience, I will tell you, people hear policy and they immediately think elected people, right? We are all policymakers, both within our own practice, with an individual person, to our entire organizations, to our engagement throughout our communities. Policy and advocacy is everyone's responsibility, and we've got to understand and see our work through the eyes of us as a policy maker. And I think if you could just spend some time thinking about that, we'd realize the significance of our leadership and our organizational work. Continuously aligning all policies across child and adult programs and interfacing systems to ACEs science and toxic stress mitigation. Here's where I want to give you a quick example. Out in Washington State, I had responsibility for the Welfare to Work program. And the federal government has done a really nice job of having this program just be about participation rates. If people are participating, people getting into jobs, whew, took care of that. And I was sitting at the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, and Jack Shonkoff was talking about cancer research. And he was going back, and he was going back in history and talking about cancer research and talking about how, as the science advanced, practice and policy in healthcare advanced along with it. Protocols changed, procedures changed, right? Along with it. And I'm sitting here and I'm realizing that in human services, we don't do that. As science changes, we don't change right along with it. And my aha moment was when Jack started talking about, again, moving with the science, and then he started talking about executive functioning. And I realized that in our Welfare to Work program, we had to move from participation that counts to engagement that matters. And I went down and I sat down with the governor and I said, Governor, this program does not match your values, I can tell you that. We are not putting people onto pathways out of poverty. We are counting participation rates for the federal government. And we look really good. We looked great to the federal government. But we were not lifting children and families out of poverty, and we were not taking a two-generation view. So these were the principles that we'd established before we went into our reform efforts. And I think this is very important, because sometimes we don't step back before we start the doing to be clear what it is we're going to achieve and the principles and values upon which that collective work is going to get done. Achieving stable and successful employment, using a family-centered case planning and engagement approach. Policies recognize the critical role and responsibility of parents in their children's development. Work First is a transitional, not long-term program to assist families on the pathway to self-sufficiency, and the importance of leveraging all resources, that thing I talked about before, in terms of that Pareto frontier and resource generation. The outcomes that we said we wanted to be about, first, and I'm very proud of this, kids are doing well. Kids are doing well. Not just that mom got to work, kids are doing well. Parents are doing well socially, housing, medical, chemical dependency, mental health, job readiness. When we use predictive analytics and looked at who are the adults and children on TANF, I would encourage you, if you've not seen that work, go to the Department of Social and Health Services website, the work done by David Mancuso, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He took our data and brought it to life through predictive analytics because we were using a one-size-fits-all case management model for a population that was nuanced across 5 different characteristics. And we realized we had to make a significant shift. And the other one is that parents are doing well economically. Can we please not just talk, when we make this alignment around poverty, that this isn't just about getting parents to work. Are they attaching to the workforce, and are they progressing? Are they progressing in the workforce, and are their wages progressing? That's truly going to be about lifting children and families out of poverty. So we did that work, and one of the things that was our aha moment was making sure that every case manager was trained in motivational interviewing. Every case manager, and I'm proud that that work is continuing after I left to get every case manager trained on the evidence of motivational interviewing out of Washington State University. And one of the things I had, you get those little notes from your staff that just make your day, and you think, okay, this is working, this is happening when you hear it from the front line. I was sitting at my computer one Sunday afternoon, and I get this email, and it was from one of our case managers. She said, Secretary Dreyfus, I don't even know if you look at your own email. I thought that was funny. But she said, I just have to thank you for this motivational interviewing training. And she told me the story of Jennifer. And this woman had been on and off of this case manager's caseload forever. And they were like this. They were like this. It was a power and control, fight to the finish kind of relationship. And so Jennifer, so the case manager now gets trained on motivational interviewing, and Jennifer kept going on the program, getting a job, coming back, getting a job, coming back, a cycler in our program. So using the motivational interviewing techniques, this case manager, now again, remember, for so many of you, especially like in more of the medical world, this is commonplace. This is new. This is new when you start doing this in the social service delivery system, right? So Jennifer comes back in, and the caseworker's using motivational interviewing, and all of a sudden, Jennifer is hitting all of her goals. She's hitting all of her goals. She assessed her needs as far more intensive than the case manager ever understood, and she developed a case plan for herself that was more than this case manager ever thought she was capable of, and she was hitting every goal. So the case manager looked at her and said, Jennifer, what happened? You know what she said? I quote, I kept this email. This is the first time you ever listened to me. I thought that was a wow. So now, turning that ship with new financing models, and I do want to just take a minute to talk about that. Let me just grab my right slide here. If we are really serious about this work, and I got to find it just a second, sorry, about changing the financing model, I got to give you this as an example. When I was in Washington State, in the height of this Great Recession, if I had wanted to build a new juvenile justice institution, which I would never want to do, but if I had wanted to, I could have gone over to the capital side of the budget, and I could have gotten the dollars, and I would have paid them back over 25-plus years, right? I would have financed the project, and we would have built ourselves a brand new, spanking new juvenile justice institution at a time when I was reducing human services right and left in all the other areas of my budget. We have got to come up with new financing models in human services that do what I call turning the ship. And I want to give you just a couple of quick examples. How many of you are aware of or involved in anything related to social impact financing that's going on around the country? I want to give you an example out of New York City. So out of New York City, you have Goldman Sachs. Yes, I said Goldman Sachs in the human services world. The Bloomberg Foundation, nice when your mayor also has a foundation. And you have an organization called, what's her name? She's an organization, a nonprofit in the area that does a lot of work on prison reentry work. And so this is a story of, again, trying to turn that ship with upfront financing called social impact financing. It started over in England. And so the Bloomberg Foundation put up $7.2 million because what they want to do is stop recidivism on Rikers Island, okay? 70% of our prisons are full because of recidivism, right? That's the churn. It's recidivism. And they wanted to reduce recidivism on Rikers Island. So they put up a $7.2 million, not grant, but guarantee. Whole new way philanthropy's thinking. Philanthropy's now in an investment mode. Put up a guarantee. Goldman Sachs put up $9.6 million. The guarantee lets Goldman Sachs know the most they can lose is somewhere around $2.4 million on this deal. They're guaranteed 7.2 of the 9.6 they put in. They came up with an intermediary, MDRC, who now hired the organization Osborne and Associates, I forgot that name before, Osborne and Associates, who are implementing cognitive behavioral therapy on Rikers Island and then making that part of the reentry of youth back into home and community as part of a more intensive aftercare strategy to reduce recidivism. The agreement of the city is that as recidivism goes down, they will shrink Rikers Island. Now, when you're running these institutions, as we were running out in Washington State with our psychiatric hospitals, our juvenile justice institutions, our DD centers, the only way you get savings out of those places is when you start shutting down whole wards and wings, because that's what reduces the staffing, right? That's where your savings are. So the deal is, as this investment works, if it does, the savings that the city realizes will go to pay back Goldman Sachs, okay? And the city, remember how government financing works. Once that happens, that is one-time money that gets paid back to Goldman Sachs, but in that budget, that is base funding. And the city has agreed that from there forward, that base funding, turning the ship, will stay invested in the front end of the juvenile justice delivery system. We've got to come up with ways, because you know what, guys? You can take all the philanthropic dollars in this country. It is like an eyedropper in the Puget Sound compared to the public sector spend. We have got to come up with creative strategies for how we're going to turn that ship of public sector financing. And I do believe there are examples of how we can do that if we can get one-time monies. If you just saved for me in Washington State 1 month of a person on our TANF program, 1 month of a child in our child welfare system, that was real money. But it's going to take an infusion and investment approach of one-time dollars that build capacity, change systems, and then lock down governors and mayors and county executives and legislators that when those savings happen, you've got to use it to reinvest back into the front end of the system to maintain the gain. I think the President's Birth to 3 initiative is fabulous. We all, every one of us in this room, we owe it to this work to be absolute champions with Congress about the President's commitment in Birth to Three. But I also hope that as savings are happening in other parts of the health and human services delivery system, we're going to find that our Congress is going to be committed to taking those savings and reinvesting it back in to the front end of the health and social service delivery system in this country. So how do we do this? Infuse, align, accelerate, and get started today. As Martha reminded us yesterday, be passionate. We are passionate. See our work as profoundly important. There's not a question in my mind that everybody in this room does that. And understand that our work may not be fully realized in our lifetimes. Laura reminded us of the Hopi Indians yesterday. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Well, I'll tell you what, you can count on me as a leader to join you as leaders to move and advance this science and move it to scale. And we've got to make that same commitment across everybody here in this room. I want to show you a quick little video. The volume. That's her father. "700 synapses a second, right?" That is my granddaughter, Alex. That is why I do this work. That is why I will continue to do this work. Because until every child, every time, in this great country of ours has the opportunity to have the kind of life this little girl's going to have, none of us can rest, and none of us are done yet. Now, next year, I hope we all come back together, because this has been a phenomenal conference. And I talked before about Sunny and those ACE vibrations, and she had me thinking Beach Boys all night long, right? Next year's map, when we look at it, and go ahead and turn on that little song. Next year's map isn't just going to tell us who we all are, it's going to show us all that we are achieving in moving the social movement across America. Thank you all very much.